So welcome everybody. I'm Deb Horan. I'll be your host this evening, and I am the owner and operator of Book Lovers Gourmet, a local independent bookstore in Webster, Massachusetts. And this is my third time hosting one of these Writers of the Future events, and it's always fun to get to talk to everybody and hear them read and discuss their works. So if anyone here is not familiar, Writers of the Future is a contest that was started by L. Ron Hubbard, and the volumes are published by Galaxy Press. And the most recent edition is this volume 36. So it's an annual contest, and it's open to anybody around the world, and it's judged blind by the top people in their fields, writers and artists. So just to make it to publication is quite a feat. So congratulations to everybody here, writers and illustrators. So what I usually do is just, I'll introduce the authors and illustrators that are here one at a time, and then give them a chance to read a little bit or talk about their work and maybe what influenced them, how they got to hear about the contest, whether it's, their first time entering, or if you've been published in other formats. And then we'll just open it up, and feel free if you have any questions to just, like I said, put them in the chat, or we can have a discussion later on. So I'm going to start in what's on my screen, the upper left corner, and that is Storm. Storm Humbert is a 30-year-old writer from Fayette, Ohio, a one-stoplight town near the Michigan border. He earned his MFA at Temple University, where he had the good fortune to study with a number of great instructors. He's currently a legal writer working in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and lives with his girlfriend in Westland. He's also his work has been published in Andromeda Spaceways, Apex Magazine, Interzone, and others. And most recently, he was a winner in the 2019 Writers of the Future contest. So his story, sorry, I'm looking for the,
You're right.
Well, Storm, I'll let you start if you want to start talking about your story, or read a little bit, and we can.
Okay. Well, this story was the fourth time I had entered the Writers of the Future contest. The first time I entered, I got a what I get? I got an honorable mention. No, silver honorable mention. Wait. Honorable mention, then a silver honorable mention. Then I got nothing. No, silver honorable mention, nothing, finalist, and then this time I was a winner, because this is the fourth time. So yeah, and it was a different story each time. I never resubmitted the same story, and I was just out of my mind excited when I found out I won. I was on vacation with my family, and I ran out of the room and told them all when I got the call from Joni. So you want me to read a little bit from the story?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. This is the artwork that accompanies my story. It was really cool by An Lee. The main character is never actually described in my story, so it was cool to see him draw that character when I had never actually talked about them. Let's see, I forget what page I'm on. 311? Yes. Okay, so I'm just going to read the first couple paragraphs so it doesn't take too long. So here's the beginning of Stolen Sky. My first night on Earth Vega was also my first sunset show. The viewing was held on the sunset mezzanine, which jutted out from the third floor of the hotel. My human guide, Ruya, gently escorted me through the press of humans on the front railing, to the front railing, so that I could see, since we Alvani are no larger than human adolescents. From the balcony, the hills seemed to tumble over each other down the gentle grade from the hotel to the edge of the forest, which then climbed gradually up toward the horizon until it terminated at the feet of the distant mountains. The breeze was bracing, but not so cool that I had to turn up the temperature of my garment. It was perfect. Everything the humans made was perfect. For the first night, they chose the sunset of a world called RNA in the Alpha Carinae system. I knew nothing about this world, but I watched in amazement as the sun of Earth Vega became the sun of RNA. When the sun touched the distant peaks, it changed from white to a smoldering orange and shrunk by at least a third. It painted the sky vivid greens and purples. There was no gradient to the shades, no violets, light greens, or near blues. The sky was either emerald or amethyst. The clouds swirled into the shifting colors as the shades swam but never mixed. It was so beautiful that it startled me. I still had so much left to see, not only on Earth Vega, but throughout the galaxy. And I feared nothing would ever measure up to the sunset show, to the first time I saw the humans change the stars. So that was just the first few paragraphs of the story. Was there anything you wanted me to talk about in particular about the story?
Well, does anyone have any questions? Does anyone have any questions to or comments about the writing process maybe? I was wondering if you came up with the story or stories in general, what comes first to you, a situation, a setting, or a character?
I think it's different for each story. In the case of this story, I think the thing that came first was the idea of changing the sunset, because it came from a talk I attended with one of my mentors, Chip Delaney, and he was talking about the concept of inventing technologies and focusing around that in speculative fiction, specifically science fiction. And so I started with it on this occasion, and it got to a place where it was thinking about ownership of a sunset and representation of a sunset and what it would mean for someone to take someone else's sunset, like something that seems so tied to a certain location. Like if you see the sunset from a certain location, it's not the same as anywhere else that you see it. So just stealing that kind of vista and that kind of really personal, innate element of someone's like culture or upbringing. It started with the technology and it grew into ownership of the idea of that kind of thing, that kind of element of someone's culture or heritage.
And also themes of colonization, taking somebody's culture or appropriating it for their own entertainment or use.
Yeah, and I think that's where the theme of like striving toward authenticity, but also like disembodying the thing that you want to be authentic. I think that's why that's in there as well. And so yeah, I think the starting point of every story is different, but I think it's important that everything else kind of grow out of it organically as you move through it, from a character to their perspective in the world to the world itself. Like all those things shouldn't be forced together. I think they kind of, regardless of where you start, they kind of spiral toward and out from each other.
So is the short story, is that your main genre, or are you writing anything more lengthy or any future projects?
Yeah, I'd say for a long time I focused on short stories just because I think that the skill it takes to craft a short story, and I'm sure that the other writers here, Chris and Leah, can back me up. It's just a tighter format. Like the execution is so much more you're operating such a smaller space that everything has to be purposeful. There's no fat once you're done with a really good short story. There's nothing to cut anymore. So I think that just from a craft perspective, that it was valuable to study short story writing and focus on short story writing for the majority of starting out as a writer. In my undergraduate, for my thesis, I wrote 2 novels that I'm sure are terrible now. I have not read them in 10 years. But since then, I've been writing exclusively short stories, and only now, since publishing this story, have I started to, I'm working on a novel now, and I'm about 325, 350 pages in. And yeah, it's like a whole different set of muscles, like just totally, it's like relearning a lot of things or shifting around a lot of the tools and using them differently for writing short stories versus a novel. Or I guess a novelette is the longest thing I've published, and that was in Andromeda Spaceways.
Okay, well, thank you.
Mhm.
And let's move on to Chris Winspear, who's in Australia, I believe, correct?
Yep, still there.
What time is it there?
It is 12 past 10 in the morning.
Okay.
It's not too bad.
Okay.
And today is Australia Day, everyone listening, January 26th. So happy Australia Day. I know this might not be as meaningful there this year, but nevertheless.
I realize that. So how do you celebrate?
Normally you get drunk, but it's really personal preference.
So Chris Winspear is also a speculative fiction author who recently won first place in the Writers of the Future contest. His short stories, The Market and No More Piano Lessons, have placed in awards in Australia, and his novel, The Light Readers, won the Writing NSW Varuna Fellowship 2017. He's currently seeking an agent to represent his high fantasy novel, 1001 Nights Under the Sun. And you can find out more about him on his website, cwinspear.com. So, Chris, if you want to speak a little bit, the name of your story in this, the trade won the first place in this whole anthology. Is that correct?
In this quarter, in my quarter. I don't think they've announced the winner for the entire year yet. So yeah, I think it's the last quarter of that year. I was the first place. And Arthur, who's on the line with us here, did an amazing illustration. This guy, oops, sorry, it's fading now. I wonder if I can get that. Anyway, you can see most of it. This guy, this handsome devil, that was all drawn by Arthur. Maybe I'll just read like a little sample and then I'll tell you about where it all came from and how it came about. So the trade. It was the best view humanity had to offer, but I still felt unfulfilled. I held my camera a few millimeters from the zenith window of the International Space Station's cupola and gazed down at what had become the common sight of Earth hanging beneath me. From up here, you couldn't tell that the planet was heating up, or that the nations had nuclear ICBMs pointed at each other. I zoomed into clouds and continents and snapped shot after shot, hunting for something in that arcing landscape of blues and whites, maybe angels. Whatever it was, I didn't find it. I stood on top of the world, but today the view made me feel uneasy, odd. Maybe I'd feel better if I was over the moon. I swung my camera around and snapped my daily selfie, husband tax, or they called it. Sometimes I felt bad for not missing him as much as he missed me. I checked the photo and grimaced at my unruly zero-G hair and the wrinkles under my eyes. At least my smile looked bright and cheerful, convincing enough even for Oleg, who should have known better. My knees remained a silent siren of discomfort in the back of my mind. What was the problem? It couldn't be vertigo or fluid shift. I'd adjusted to all that. I glanced out the port window at the space station remote manipulator system. the station's huge Canadian robotic arm. Wasn't the SSRMS supposed to have moved along by now on its survey? Ground must have found something. Maybe I was anxiously anticipating their call. Or maybe I felt uneasy because the magic of space had already become dull and routine, as if the majestic sight of Earth from orbit was no more special than the view out of my old kitchen window. I'd made it up here onto the ISS, and yet after 2 months of this amazing life in microgravity no longer produced any sense of thrill or achievement. What was wrong with me? My name, Lena Sokolov, would be engraved in the lists of early astronauts, glorified for as long as humanity survived. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to go to Mars. I wanted to go to Alpha Centauri. I wanted to be immortal and lead the disheartened human race into a more optimistic future. Even then, the unknown thing I hunted with my camera might still remain out of reach. I glanced again at the photo and my unease heightened alarmingly. In the background of the image, the stars looked wrong, too bright. I turned to the bow window and noticed what my subconscious had picked up half an hour ago. But I couldn't believe it. The stars weren't skewed or faint. There had to be something wrong with my eyes. My consciousness, unlike my instincts, possessed incredible powers of denial. Only after a few minutes of blinking and experimenting with the camera did I accept what I saw. A transparent wall hung past the bow of the station, stretching and skewing the stars belonged. A wall or a hull? The effect reminded me of those incredible deep sea fish that could change their skin to match the ocean floor beneath them. Something gigantic had camouflaged itself and crept up on us, come to rest outside our main docking adapter. I glanced back to the SSRMS, which remained stationary. Had a transparent thing also cut off our communication with the ground? Lena, come to Node 2 now! Una screams reverberated throughout the station. And stop there. Yeah, this story was actually also my fourth entry that before I had, before it won. The early entries, I think one of them was highly commended and then the rest were nothing. And actually, I didn't think this was my strongest story when I submitted it. I was going for, generally I write more off-kilter, more, I'm trying to go for like original, not that anything is really original these days, but generally I write more extreme, esoteric sci-fi. And this was a kind of easier to get into story, more like accessible story, I guess. So I think that's why it had appeal. I don't know, maybe they just liked it. It came about because it actually has a lot of hard sci-fi elements. So the International Space Station had a kind of virtual tour you could do online. And so I heard about that. I don't know how I found that, but I ended up there and I ended up going through the space station and seeing the astronauts explain how things work and the blue handles, and the SSRMS is like that big arm thing that moves stuff around station. And this thought occurred to me that if an alien is visiting Earth, they're the most accessible humans to have a chat with because they're already out there in orbit. And so that sort of spiraled out into this story. And an early draft I sent to some of my writing friends here in Sydney, and they said instead of offering, because the story kind of goes on and the alien comes, and instead of him being quite a dry or serious alien diplomat, it's more of a used car salesman kind of character, and he just comes and he's trying to like peddle and swoon these swindle these astronauts. I guess at first all these gifts were all over the place, and then I got some advice from my writing friends here to make it more focused on a kind of contemporary issue. So that's where I added all this climate change nuance to things, and then it's kind of supposed to be at a point where climate change is getting to such a problem that nations are militarizing, etc. Just to add tension to then make the decision more difficult when this, I guess, the salesman starts offering them solutions, but of course for a price. Yeah, are there any questions?
Yeah, it was interesting, the concept of what would you trade for the greater good of humanity? How many individuals are you willing to sacrifice for that? For a
Yeah.
better future, for a better future for the.
Yeah, and this, I guess, became even more topical when COVID spread, and that people making this argument about health versus the economy. So it ended up becoming even more topical after it was published, which was interesting.
Does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I didn't catch that, Deb.
Sorry, my voice still, sometimes my audio freezes. I was just saying, if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask or comment. The last time we met, Arthur was able to show us some sketches. I don't know if he has some with him tonight that he can just show the progress of the piece that you made for the story.
Oh yeah, I got the folder that's got all my preliminary work into it. So yeah, if anyone wants to check those out, I'd be happy to show those again. Let me see. See if I can do a screen share here. Advanced. I think this is how I do it. There we go. You guys able to see everything?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, these are the preliminary sketches after reading the story by Chris and submitting them to the art director, Echo Chernik, who was helping me out throughout the creation of the final piece. And yeah, definitely Chris's story was very easy to get into, and with a lot of the topics and technology that the guests, the alien creature that we meet on the International Space Station offers, I was kind of like wanting to, it was a bit of a challenge because I wasn't sure how much of the technology that he was offering that I wanted to show without it being too cluttered or really giving too much away, because as an illustrator, especially for book covers and such, you don't want to give everything away in the one image, as amazing of an image as it would be. So I kind of had to like rein in a little bit. So my top choices were between, I'm not sure if you guys can see my mouse cursor, but between sketch A and sketch D. So I just really liked the composition and the mood for both of those. And after talking a bit back and forth with Echo, we decided that D would be the most effective for like the cover illustration for the story, because it was so direct. And honestly, I just loved the alien character that Chris wrote. He pretty much stole the show of that story. So, but I do really like how sketch A, I was actually looking through these about a couple hours before starting the meeting, and I was like, oh, I might actually go back and do that piece as like a personal piece, just because I like the composition and the mood of it. But, and here is, I have to fix these windows, the final, how it all came out. So yeah, I'm still pretty proud of how this piece came out.
It was so good after I printed it out, and I have it hung up around the place. So thank you.
Yep, no problem, man.
I had a question because, like Arthur said, like the alien dude does steal the show. I wondered if you went through different iterations of him that weren't so much a used car salesman, were more like kind of stock as we think of Alien First Contacts.
Not so much in this story, but I think I'd written earlier work where there were kind of other versions of diplomats and First Contact, and so that pre-work allowed me to kind of jump to the development that became Daiko, the trader, the guy pictured right here in front of us. And also reading a bit too, like I really enjoyed the Culture series by E.M. Banks, and it just has so much crazy world building. And that kind of the theme of those books is there's different levels of technology among civilizations, and there's a lot of moments where a very developed civilization is influencing a lesser developed civilization. So I guess I had all that background as well. Those are great books, by the way, if anyone's interested. The Culture series.
I have to check them out.
Yeah, by a British author who actually just passed away recently, for E.M. Banks. They're going to make an Amazon series about it, but they recently pulled the plug on it. I'm not sure why.
Well, thank you, Arthur, for sharing that again. And why don't we move on to Leah Ning, who is a new participant here, and her story is Yellow and Pink. And I'll just give you a little bit of background about her. She lives in Northern Virginia with her husband and 5 pets. But you say your heart lies in New England, and we're actually having a cold and snowy night right this minute as we speak. So
Oh, I miss it.
I can send some snow your way.
Please do. I will take all of it. So will
Yeah.
my dog.
Wow. How long have you been away?
I moved to DC when I left for college, and I have not been back to live there since. I still go back to visit, but that's about it. So, God, has it been probably a good 8 years or so, I would say, something like that.
Well, if you're ever in the Massachusetts area, you'll have to stop in and visit.
Yes, ma'am, will do.
So would you like to read a little bit from your story?
Sure, I can do that. So I guess I'll start off showing gosh, it's hard to show the illustration, but this is the illustration that Ermac Kavun did for my story. It is so gorgeous. I'm still not over it. Like, she just did so good, and it makes me happy. Anyway, so I'll just read the first scene. How many times? The dying man whispered. Nathan Reed's attention did not waver from the arm he was working on. Decades ago, Edward Weaver's dying words had bothered him. Today, they were like a fly lighting briefly on his neck, and he had to ask, "Pardon? How many times have you killed me?" 8, counting this one, Nathan said. Nothing personal, it's just that this way you can't tell anyone. He pulled a small square piece of plastic from Weaver's arm as its owner's breaths grew shallower. He dipped it into the bottle of alcohol, which he sealed and stored in Weaver's left pocket. The rest of the instruments, still bloody, went into the right. What are you trying to change? Nathan had never heard that question before. Did he owe the man whose life he was stealing an answer? He stayed silent and inserted the plastic into the incision on his own forearm. Then he pressed the pistol into Weaver's hand and stood. Soon, to anyone observing the scene, it would appear that Nathan had been attacked but died before his device could be taken. Shoot, Nathan said. Gladly, said the dying man. Nathan had chosen someone vengeful for a reason. The flat report of the gunshot echoed around the alley. Nathan fell with a grunt of pain, fingers pressing at the new slick of blood on his belly. Gut shot again. He'd thought that he might be used to it by now, but he always began to whimper when the burning started. So yeah, that's the first scene of Yellow and Pink. Basically, like everybody, my method for coming up with stories is always kind of different, but this one first came to me as that first line in the shower, of course, because that's where all ideas come from, I guess. And from there, I kind of just started playing the what if game of like, okay, well, what would make somebody say that? Why are they dying? And then I came up with the idea that this guy has been killed 8 times by the same person. Like, all right, well, how does that happen? And then I went downstairs and used my poor husband as a rubber duck, which I always do, and told him I was thinking about writing a time travel story. And he was like, really, dude, time travel? And I was like, please trust me. I swear it's not terrible. And it turned out to not be super terrible, which is cool. But this was my second entry to Writers of the Future. My first one was a flat rejection, and this one was pretty funny because I didn't get the first finalist call. I emailed Joni, I think 4 or 5 days after I saw the results start to come out on the Writers of the Future forums, and was like, hey, I know you're super busy, but I haven't seen my result yet. If you could just, let me know when you find it, that would be super cool. And then she called me the day before Thanksgiving and was like, hey, so I was supposed to chat with you last week, but you won. I was like, okay. So that was a pretty cool experience. Not something I imagined would happen actually in the days kind of leading up to when Joni called me. I was thinking about all the ways that I could potentially rewrite the story to be better next time and maybe resubmit it. So it kind of just goes to show that you never know with a story whether it's going to tickle an editor's fancy or not. So I saw a question in chat from Andy. When did you realize you had something new to say about time travel? I didn't. I just sort of was like, man, this sounds like a cool story. I'm going to write it and we'll see if somebody likes it, I guess. I guess it was mainly that I didn't feel it was a story about time travel, if that makes any sense. It was a story about how far you would go to save somebody that you love. And time travel just so happened to be the method that he used to figure that out, I guess, if that makes any sense. Does anybody have any questions or comments or concerns?
I was just going to say that that's how your story struck me also. Like, it's not a time travel story. It actually elides the time travel problem by not kind of prompting the reader to ask questions about how it works, because it's about the people. It's a mechanism that exists, and you ask them to accept that it exists, and you don't belabor it. And so I think that's why it's not like a time travel story. It's a story about the characters that involves time travel.
Yeah, I guess it was definitely also like it had to be a method of time travel that came at a high price if you didn't have the means to access it. So you had to find somebody and kill them before that they could take their own device back, basically. And that, I think, was the reason why it became like, how far would you go? What would you do? How long would you force yourself to live? Apparently the answer is about 200 years, at least for this guy.
And are you currently working on any other projects at the moment?
Yeah, so I got a couple of other short stories published after Writers of the Future, one in Apocalyptic, which is an anthology from Zombies Need Brains. I also got one published in Cosmass Infinities in issue 3. And so I've just been continuing to work on short stories for the time being, and I've started working on a novel, but I'm definitely not 300 or so pages in like Storm is, but we'll get there at some point.
I'm curious, Leah, did you have you written novels before? Have you written short stories before? How long have you, I guess, been writing it? And when did you get into it, or from what angle did you get into it?
So I started writing when I was pretty young. Started writing fan fiction for like Pirates of the Caribbean and Harry Potter and stuff like that because that's how it be. Um, but I actually ended up writing a fair amount, like word count wise. I probably wrote like 100, 130K of fan fiction, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it is when you're like 14, you know? So I wrote a lot of that when I was younger. I started writing more original stuff in high school, some sort of like rambling thing that attempted to be a novel and definitely wasn't. And then I kind of took like an 8-year break because I just didn't have time. It was college. That's how it is. And then I started maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago now. I kind of was like, hey man, you know what I really miss? Writing. I'm gonna go write some stuff. And then I came across Writers of the Future and I was like, wait, you can write short stories. So Yellow and Pink was the second short story I wrote, which was why I wildly did not expect to win. And so yeah, that was kind of it, I guess. That was how I came at it. It was an interesting switch from long rambling things that didn't know how to turn into novels to very, very short things that actually were real life stories with actual endings.
So, what was your inspiration for the story? Is there anything specific?
I mean, I would say that the inspiration for this story was kind of just that universal. I mean, everybody, I think, to some extent, is, you know, concerned about their loved ones passing away at some point. And, you know, it kind of started out as a wish fulfillment thing, like, hey, it would be pretty cool if you could travel back in time and relive your life all over again, such that you could figure out how to save that person and then they wouldn't have to die at an early age and it would be less sucky. And then I kind of realized by the end, like, okay, that's sort of just wish fulfillment. That's not how real life works. And it kind of became more of a story about accepting that death happens and it sucks and we have to learn how to deal with it, I guess. Kind of morbid, sorry.
Well, I thought it was interesting how you brought in the other character who he kept trying to save, his wife, and let her in on it at the end of what was going on. And I think she kind of helped him end it all. I mean, as far as, you know, saying that was enough. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I got the feeling he would have just kept going and going.
Yeah, for sure. Because he never really gave her a choice until the end where he decided, okay, you know what, maybe I should chat with her about it and see what she wants. Like, she never got the choice of whether or not she would have wanted to live or whether or not he would have done that for her. Like, I would imagine that having the burden of knowing that your loved one had just spent the past couple of centuries trying to figure out a way to save you would be fairly massive.
So with the COVID virus, have you reconsidered your stance on not being able to go back and change things?
I don't know if it's so much of a stance as just I wanted to write the story in a way such that it more helps the processing of that eventuality more than like a wish fulfillment story about being able to do that. Like, I don't think COVID has changed my views on death and accepting death because, I mean, it kind of was already there before COVID. So I don't I didn't really intend to take a stance with the story that you should just accept death and don't worry about it. It was more just a like, crappy things are going to happen sometimes, and here's a story that maybe hopefully will help some people process that.
Louise has a question. I think it can go to anyone. Can everyone hear me? Can you-
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I just lost it. How short is a short story, and what do you do if you have a writing block or writer's block? Anyone can take that if you're feeling.
I think the first part's pretty straightforward because technically a short story is 1,001 to 7,500 words. Talking about technically the length that qualifies for awards, publications, things like that. It's from 1,001 to 7,500. Then 7,500 to 8,500 is like a novelette. 8,500 to whatever is a novel, is a novella, and then beyond that is a novel. And anything 1,000 or less is a flash fiction. But writer's block is probably unique to every writer, has their own way to deal with it. I tend to agree with Ray Bradbury that if you have writer's block, you're working on something that isn't interesting. So I tend to move my story along to the part that is. And then if I have to backtrack and fill it in, I do. But I tend to want to jump to, I want to keep where the energy is. And so I find if I'm blocked, I'm trying to push through a low energy moment to get to the high energy moment. So I just go to the high energy moment. And then if I find I need to transition better, I go back and do that.
Anyone else? How they deal with writer's block?
I guess for me, I try to not do the stereotypical sit in front of the blank page and stare at it. If I have writer's block, I try to kind of just, like if I find myself sitting and staring at a blank page and I can't figure out what to write, I will go for a walk, I'll go read a book, I'll go play a video game, watch a movie. Like for me personally, I often find that if I have writer's block, then I need to go do something that kind of refills the creative well a little bit instead of sitting there and stressing out about how the well is empty, you know?
Yeah, I find it's good to allow yourself to have breaks when you feel like you need a break. It's important to make sure that writing stays fun, because it's pretty rare that a short story actually gets published or wins an award or something. Most of the time you have to go off your own self-satisfaction when you're writing. So if you force yourself too much, there's a risk that it won't be fun anymore, and then you'll stop. So I prefer to just take it easy. One day it will come. Other days it's, there's other concerns that day. Just roll with it. And make sure you're enjoying yourself. Now, obviously, not every moment is enjoying. Like if you're editing a novel, like it's a third pass editing a novel is not necessarily enjoying, but you have a goal and you're working towards it for your own fulfillment. So as long as you have that motivation, you should be okay.
And I also wanted to introduce, it looks like we have Andy Dibble here too. He's also one of the winning authors, and he wrote A Word That Means Everything. Last time he read part of the story, and it looks like he was asking a question about the length of the short story, 8,500 or 7,500 cutoff. But did you want to?
Oh yeah, I think novelette is 7,500 till 1,500, something like that. You can look it up online if you
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, especially for like the Nebula and Hugo Awards have very defined word length categories that can give you that guidance.
So speaking of other authors who have inspired you, who would you say is your overall, writer that you aspire to write like or admire or had, an influence on your writing?
I think an issue that sci-fi has is when people are told, hey, you should try out sci-fi, they tend to pick up a classic like Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke, which are very dated now compared to the work contemporary writers are doing. So I think this is actually a bit of a problem in the marketing of sci-fi, in that people will try those quite old books and then be turned off sci-fi. All my favorite authors are either generally still alive or have been working recently. So I mentioned E.M. Banks for large scale kind of crazy world building, but there's just so many authors working different ways. I've always enjoyed William Gibson because he has this way of imagining the near future. This is the guy who wrote Neuromancer. Which
Just
started
finished that.
Hmm?
I just
You were
finished
gonna say that?
Neuromancer 2 weeks ago.
Oh, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then you realize how many other things have been influenced by this book, including Cyberpunk, the game that came out recently, as well as references to Neuromancer. Anyway, so he came up with one kind of near version future, which had the internet before the internet was there, and it had cyberspace. It's where the word cyberspace comes from. And then he did this again, like 20 years later. He's come up with a different vision of the future. And then again, like there's another series, which is like the version beyond that. So it just has this amazing creativity. It's not like in space or anything. It's like, it's close enough so that all the technology is right on the cusp of happening. He's amazing. I recommend checking him out. And for hard stuff, there's a guy called Reynolds. I think it's Arthur Reynolds. And he used to be an astrophysicist. So he writes space opera, but he never breaks the speed limit. He always has some sort of rudimentary understanding of how energy is conserved. And it's a great example of how you can write very futuristic, very intense, out there sci-fi without breaking known rules. And actually you can create more tension sometimes with those rules. What do you guys think? What are your favorite?
So for me, I think that like my greatest author influence in terms of maybe how I write and how I view writing is probably George R.R. Martin, just because of I don't know, I think Game of Thrones was the first epic fantasy I really invested in as a reader. I didn't read a lot until I was a little older, like probably 20, because I'm a very slow reader. So it was hard for me to say, reading, video games, which gives me more immediate gratification, video games. But since I've come to enjoy reading more, I find that there's a lot I can learn from any of the great authors that I read, like Ursula Le Guin. She is so good at telling. Like we're as authors, as short story writers especially, we're told, show don't tell, but Ursula Le Guin is so incredibly good at telling. Like she's so good at it you don't notice she's doing it, and she's just telling you all the stuff and you're like, she's not showing me any of it, but I don't care because it's so interesting and it's so well done. And then you see how George R.R. Martin builds his worlds through the eyes of his characters, which is different than how Tolkien builds worlds, which is the world exists, he positions the world around them, then places his characters in it. And George R.R. Martin has you very close third person in his characters most of the time, experiencing the world and viewing it, learning about it that way. And I think that's a more effective form of world building, so that's how I try to do it. And I don't think that any writer really aspires to write like somebody else, but I think if I was going to pick somebody a writer I want to be like as a person, I think that Bradbury, just because he always seemed to enjoy it so much, whether he's talking about it, doing it. It was just always very joyful for him to write. And it was like his religion basically was writing. And yeah, so I think if I was going to pick a writer to be like, it would be Ray Bradbury, just because he always seemed to really exalt in writing. I
heard recently that Ursula Le Guin was being they were making, they're making a postage stamp for her.
Yeah, I just started reading the Earthsea series, so I'm almost to the first book of that. I'm ingesting a lot of epic fantasy since that's what I'm writing right now.
He's written poetry as well.
Yeah.
Poetry, and I have a book of photographs that somebody took and they collaborated with her poetry. It's a really nicely done.
Yeah, I think it was probably Tolkien and Martin that showed me the value of songs and poetry in fiction to build the world, because those kind of pieces of the in-world aesthetic do such a huge amount of work in a small amount of space to build your world. And I just think there's lessons that you can learn from every writer, because every writer is very, very good at least something. Like there's something that's they're extremely good at that you can take away from their writing, if they're good. What about you, Leah?
I think if I had to pick an author that I most aspire to be like, it would probably be Stephen King, mainly because I feel like his writing is incredibly accessible, no matter what reading level you're at. I mean, yeah, he uses big words sometimes, but it doesn't feel like he uses them in an exclusionary way, such that like you must understand this word in order to understand this story that he's telling. And he also has an incredible grasp of how to make a character like a real human being, and it absolutely fascinates me. So that I don't aspire to write prose like Stephen King, but I really like the way that his writing exists. I actually wanted to ask Arthur too, are there any artists that most inspire you or that you look up to?
There are actually quite a few contemporary artists that I look up to. Like pretty much mostly what really interests me the most that I'm trying to emulate in my work is any artist whose work has a lot of energy in a lot of their pieces. I mean, even if they're painting a still scene, the way that they handle their brush strokes and mark making still has a very good sense of flow. And I think a lot of artists that I like to follow that do that are artists like Cynthia Shepherd, Donato Giancarlo, who I actually mentored under for a couple of years in the Smart School program. So yeah, a lot of those guys are fantastic painters. Tyler Jacobson is a concept artist and he does some work for Wizards of the Coast. He also has some very fantastic work. And even old classic artists like John Singer Sargent. I've actually didn't really get into Sargent until I started taking painting classes in college. But seeing and studying some of his work more closely and how he handles paint and renders his subjects, I think it's fantastic how he can go from rendering out the tiniest little detail on a subject's face and then just letting everything else go on like their clothing in the background, but it doesn't look sloppy. It still has that nice sense of energy and flow and atmosphere that I really try to emulate with my work.
What's your preferred medium? Do you like to paint, draw, digital?
Right now I prefer drawing, though sadly it's been a little while since I've reconnected with just studying focusedly on drawing. A lot of my work currently has been digital just because it's much faster, and it's kind of how I've been teaching myself how to paint, because it's a little bit easier to course correct, to make edits, but also to experiment. So oil paint, as much as I love oil paint, it can be a little bit unforgiving if you really mess up. Plus, it's also much more time intensive. So I really do like respect the hell out of a lot of artists that still work in oils. Like again, my mentor Donato Giancarlo, he still works in oils. Like another student I studied under him with named Jarrell. Jarrell Threat is his last name. He also works in oil. Does fantastic paintings. So I like to get back into oil, but primarily my work now is digital, just because the freedom that it allows and the ease of how I can experiment and correct mistakes when I'm still trying to teach myself how to paint and render the way that I want to.
Any future projects for publishing for you or?
For me, right now I've been, since actually getting published in Writers of the Future, I've been getting a lot more freelance jobs from independent authors. Like the author I'm working with the most right now is an independent author named Antoine Vandelay. He does a lot of fantasy novels that are set primarily, instead of in European folklore and mythology, he focuses a lot on African folklore and mythology, specifically in West Africa. And we're currently working on a small series I'm doing covers for that's called TJ Young and the Orishas, which is pretty much a Harry Potter style, Percy Jackson style story of a young kid who's growing up how to learn and use magic, and he's coming into contact with these beings called the Orishas, which are pretty much gods and goddesses of the Yoruba culture in West Africa. And it's been really fun and interesting, painting different cultures and learning about it and working with Antoine, who's really chill and easy to work with. So, I mean, yeah, if you guys are interested in some West African folklore mythology, looking for a fantasy series with a different spin on it, definitely check out his work. But that's been pretty much it right now. And I'm still looking for new opportunities. In fact, I'm also working for doing a small little map project with Storm here. Got the map to my right, Sally. Everything is penciled in. So hopefully I can try to get down to painting it and get that ready for Storm hopefully by the end of March.
Yeah, I'm very excited. He's drawn my fantasy world map. I'm reading Chris's novel. I've really enjoyed just like with this whole process of being selected as a winner and being put into this group. I've read some of Andy's stories. Pretty much I haven't been sending anything out to anybody because I've been working on the novel, but I fully plan to subject them to the first draft of my novel once it's done. But it's been really cool to make all these connections with artists and writers, just as a result of being selected into this inherently small group. It's been really cool.
Yeah, it's been awesome. I mean, and again, the door's open as well. If you guys need me or would like me to illustrate anything for you guys, I'm always open. Feel free to drop me a line anytime.
Yeah, it's because it's your first map, right?
Yes, I've actually not done like a map commission. It's still a little on my wheelhouse, but it's been an interesting challenge. So yeah, looking forward to finally getting into painting it once I've got all the tech primarily is going to be the biggest hurdle because I'm not a good calligrapher. But once I got that, should be smooth sailing.
Right. Yeah, I can't wait to actually meet you guys in person one day.
Yeah. Yeah. it'll be
Same
fun.
here.
Yeah, looking forward to meeting you guys.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool, actually. We kind of get some time to get to know each other before we all get tossed together in a tiny room.
Yeah.
On that note, though, I actually have to go to work, I'm afraid.
How dare you?
But you guys hang out. I'll
Thank
duck
you.
off, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
thanks for tuning in. Audience members, go out and enjoy Australia Day while until midnight.
Happy Australia Day.
Happy
Oh,
Australia
beautiful.
Day.
Don't get too drunk.
Oh, that was last night. I'm recovering today.
Ah.
See you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, so normally when is the ceremony for the winners?
The last week of April into the first part of March. Right, May.
Opposite.
That's how months go. Yeah.
March into April is usually
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. April. That's what it is.
Close enough. You had the right 2 months.
M's and A's. I got it in there somewhere.
Well, hopefully you'll get to meet each other in person someday soon too.
I mean, I think if they can't do it, they'll just push it back again, which I think most of us are totally fine with.
Yeah, because it's best for all of us to get that that experience of all, like this meeting, hanging out, learning together, and then sharing in that big, huge ceremony experience that we've seen on the Facebook group as well, from what Wolf has been showing in a lot of his photos. That looks awesome. I love the
Mhm.
experience.
It'll be nice to have to get dressed up again. I just work from home now, so I just
Yeah.
wear my work clothes and be nice to wear a suit and tie or tux, I guess, actually.
I know, right? I'm like looking forward to looking like a real person again.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Storm and Arthur, for sending in the signed book plates as well. I got both of them in today. And I just wanted to mention, if anyone here is interested in getting a copy of the book, I do have copies at the store, and I'll I'll mail them out. I put the link in the chat for to order the book, and I'm happy to send out copies with the book plates as well, if anyone is interested. And yeah, I think it was great to see everybody again. And I think one of the silver linings in this whole situation we find ourselves in is that we can just finding different ways to connect with each other. And, you know, there's no space or time limitations as far as, you know, we had Chris in Australia and we're here and all over the country. So I found that's kind of a good way to take advantage of the situation and make the best of it. But hopefully we can all get back to meeting in person. And it was just great to have everybody here. And I wish you all the best in your future endeavors in writing and illustrating. It's not an easy career, that's for sure.
No.
Anything in the arts is, you know, but I definitely will do whatever I can to support you as a bookseller. That's my passion. So, you know, I appreciate your taking the time to be here. Thank you to Mitch for setting it up, Mitch Brewer. And
Thank you for hosting.
Yes,
Thank you
thank
for
you.
having us. This
Yeah.
was really nice.
to have some in-store events pretty soon. But this is a good way until then to do it. So if anyone, I don't know if anyone has anything else, but let me see. It looks like we have 2 new messages in the chat, but just thanking everyone. Mitch says great job, and thank you. So I guess we'll sign off now unless anyone has anything further.
No.
But
Nope, that should be it. Thanks everyone for coming
hopefully-
by.
yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully we'll do this again. And hope you all have a good time to celebrate when the time comes. And congratulations to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye,
You
everyone.
too. Night.
Bye.
Bye.